Good evening and welcome to our conversation tonight. This is the first in a series of conversations we're planning to explore the topic of school safety. School safety is kind of an all-encompassing topic of the range of issues that parents face on a day-by-day basis, that students face on a day-by-day basis, communities face, and it's a challenge because as we as a society have become more in tune with the technology that's supposed to make life a little bit easier and a little bit less cumbersome, it's also become one of the tools that bullies have decided that's the next area to abuse and threaten and otherwise try and intimidate their fellow students. It's a problem that we may not have solutions for, but it's not for lack of a lot of creative energy that's being invested on the part of the state of Wisconsin, on the part of our individual police departments, on the part of our school districts. And it's something that tonight we want to explore a little bit more in depth. I want to welcome my guest for tonight. Susan Whitstone is the Deputy Director of the Office of School Safety in the Department of Justice for the Wisconsin Department of Justice. That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
But Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here. Ryan Turner is the School Safety Coordinator for the School District of Beloit. And Ryan, welcome. It's great to have you here. And to my immediate right, Sergeant Benji Thompson from the Janesville Police Department. And you are kind of the conduit between the department and the liaisons that you place in the high schools here in Janesville and in other circumstances across the district. So welcome to the three of you. I want to start the conversation out in this fashion. And I want to begin, if I could, with you, Sergeant Thompson. You are in a role that puts you in a position of having the big picture of what goes on in the Janesville School District. Is the whole issue of school safety something that we should be seriously concerned about, or is it just one of those passing fashion sort of things that it takes care of itself?
I think it's something that we should be concerned about. I mean, I think, we've seen across the country, like violence that's in our schools, violence that's in our workplace, violence at our farmers market, and just, violence in our society as a whole. And when it comes to schools and, with the Janesville Police Department and our partnership with the School District of Janesville, we are very deliberate about ensuring that our school resource officers are creating a safe atmosphere for the students and staff within the schools in our school district.
I want to dive deeper into the amount of resources the Janesville Police Department commits to the district in a minute or so. Ryan, you have the responsibility of supervising all of the safety security matters for the Beloit School District. Tell us about that broad scope and what's your job entail?
So my role has evolved just in the last 4.5 years that I've been there. But one of my main focuses is Act 143, which is basically the statute in Wisconsin that kind of lays out for schools what we should be doing as a bare minimum. So school safety drills, fire drills, emergency planning, what should be in those plans. And the list is long, but in my opinion, very complete. So just ensuring that we're compliant with that, offering support to the principals and assistant principals, making sure that, one, they understand the why behind the things that we're asking them to do, and that they're actually getting those accomplished. Beyond that, I supervise our security staff. I liaison between the school district and our SRO program with the Beloit Police Department. I oversee ensuring that our district as a whole gets annual training in emergency planning. We bring in consultants, and they run us through our EOC drills and items like that. I also just troubleshoot with principals. Hey, I've got this problem, they're engaging in these behaviors, or, I have this issue with this parent. Just help me troubleshoot this problem from your lens of, where I've come from in my career, but that's kind of the short version.
Susan, you have responsibility on a statewide basis for all of the support the state of Wisconsin provides to local school districts in this arena called school safety. Give us a perspective of what is the Department of Justice doing with the Office of School Safety, and let me start with the easy question: why is it in the Department of Justice and not in the Department of Public Instruction?
Well, we were developed in 2018, and we were developed in response to the Parkland, Florida tragedy, where 17 school staff and students were killed in that school tragedy. And that was Wisconsin's response. And when State Statute 118.07 was developed at that point, they determined that our office should be in the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And since then, we have developed our office in a comprehensive approach from what you were talking about with Act 143, with our best practices through our school safety submissions on an annual basis, the grants that were provided to our schools. In addition, we have developed our Speak Up, Speak Out threat reporting system, a behavioral threat assessment and management protocol that we developed with our stakeholders in Wisconsin, a crisis response and recovery system. And we were able to do that because we wrote for $4.2 million in federal stop grants. So we've basically developed a four-pronged approach of comprehensive school safety in Wisconsin so that we can help reduce barriers for our private and public schools in Wisconsin to be safe, because they're already safe and we want them to stay safe.
I want to ask Ryan, if I could, your background. How did you get into risk management, and more importantly, how did you get into school risk management into this whole arena?
Sure. So
it's a pretty specialized.
it is, and I'll be honest, I didn't really know that it existed until I was just perusing for a career change. Prior to getting into my position, I have over a decade in law enforcement service down in Illinois, and it was just time for a change for a multitude of reasons. And so I was, as I said, just kind of perusing around, and I saw the job posting. I read the description, and I'm like, I can do that. So I applied. Here I am, and I have learned a lot in the 4.5 years that I've been here, and I truly miss the law enforcement realm. But what's nice is that every day I draw on that experience from, again, troubleshooting with administrators or just decision making. So it's been fun.
Sergeant Thompson, you've been with the Janesville Police Department for a number of years, and you've got a variety of assignments. Did you draw the short straw to get this assignment, or how did you end up in this particular role?
I actually would think I'm lucky. It's of course overseeing our school resource officers, but training, hiring, recruitment, kind of a potpourri of tasks for the department. So there's a lot of variety, and I enjoy it.
It's interesting to me that the orientation of the state's response to school safety issues is it was placed in the Department of Justice, which gives it somewhat of a law enforcement bent or philosophy, as opposed to putting it in DPI, where it wouldn't have quite that emphasis. How does that translate into the programming that you're providing, Susan?
Well, we provide training in behavioral threat assessment and management. We provide training in standard response protocol and standard reunification. So in our crisis response and recovery, we also provide training in Prepare 1 and Prepare 2 for our schools for recovery and response. We also provide training for our school and school staff and for our school communities in violence prevention so that they know when they see something that may be concerning, where they can report that to, if it's law enforcement or if it's to a reporting platform, whether it's Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin, or if it's another reporting platform such as P3 Campus or Crime Stoppers.
How did you get into the school safety business?
That's a great question. So my history is in law enforcement.
Okay.
And prior to working in the Wisconsin Department of Justice, I was with law enforcement. I took probably the scariest job after law enforcement. I stayed home with my kids.
Yeah.
So I completely and thoroughly understand. I think what a lot of our school staff are going through. I thank school staff every single day when I teach everything that they're going through because staying home with my children gave me an understanding of what they do every single day. And I am so appreciative to school staff of what they do. After that, when my kids were old enough to go to school, I applied for a job with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, and I worked in the Crime Information Bureau. And I heard about this transfer to the Office of School Safety in 2018, and I knew the importance because my children were in school, and that's why I took this position with the Office of School Safety. I thought with my background and my children that the mission was there and it was important to keep schools safe.
Interesting how that evolution comes back. And the philosophy and just the law enforcement background translates into this new setting. The Janesville School District just passed a referendum, I think it was $151.8 million for capital improvements, and roughly half of that is related to physical improvements in the buildings themselves to make them safer. The guidance that they received to do that, I'm presuming, came in part through consultation with the Janesville Police Department, with the State Department of Justice, and others. I'm kind of awestruck by that amount of money going into school safety, and when you run through the numbers, it's 20 buildings in the Janesville School District, and you do the math. That's a lot of money per building for safety. Is it because we were not safe before, Sergeant?
I feel like the district has made some significant improvements as a taxpayer, I guess, and as a partner to the school district with the secure pathways. So I was up at Craig High School today. You go almost through like a bullpen, if you will, where you get buzzed through one door and then you get like verified, and it was pretty easy. I'm in a uniform and I'm up there frequently, so and then you can kind of continue on your way. But speaking with our school resource officers, there's never enough cameras. There's always like there's a blind spot here. I want a camera here. There's no cameras in the stairwells, and just constantly yearning for more and a better way. Like I heard somebody talking last week, and it's like it would be great if there was some, we could tell if every door, they can look at a camera and see that, okay, all these doors look like they're closed, but maybe this one's slightly ajar, or maybe this one's been propped where, you know, and I don't even know if necessarily technology exists for this, but they can look on a screen and, for instance, maybe all the doors are green, like that they're secure, versus maybe one is red that's showing, oh, it's open or ajar or whatnot. So from, I guess, our standpoint and with our SROs, like the more technology, the more security that can harden those schools and keep somebody out and monitor, the better for us.
It almost seems that we've gotten to a stage in our society where we've created such a high level of security that once you get in, you can never get out. And once you're out, you may never get back in. Is that, how does that impact education positively, negatively, from the perspective of, is it an armed camp? And, and, and what's the role of the liaison officer to make sure that, I guess, they're seen but not heard? How does that work? How do you?
Well, our SROs are kind of wear three hats. Where the informal counselor, they're very deliberate about creating those relationships with students. When I was up at Craig, the SRO Sean Yelk at Craig, his office is right in one of the main hallways, and he gives out little 8-ounce bottles of water for anybody that wants to stop by. And of course, it's during passing time, not in the middle of like class periods. But it's developing that positive relationship and educator, whether it's our middle school SROs in elementary school, teaching about stranger danger or of course, the law enforcement officer as well. I mean, there's thefts that occur in the schools. There's batteries, whatnot. So they kind of wear those three hats and really try to embrace all three of those roles. In my opinion, I feel like school, although it was probably close to 30 years ago since I was in a classroom in this school district as a student, I feel like it's very similar to when I was in school, absent. I mean, cell phones really didn't exist back then, so.
Yeah, but we'll come back to cell phones. That's a whole area of policy that I'm confident that the Department of Justice has a perspective to share. We'll come back to that one. Ryan, you are past law enforcement. You have a role in supervising school liaisons that are law enforcement. How does that relationship work in the Beloit School District? And how many school liaison officers does the Beloit Police Department provide to the schools?
Sure. So we have 3 SROs assigned to our school district. We have 1 dedicated to the high school, and then we have 1 at each of our 2 middle schools. So Aldrich Middle School has an SRO, Fruza Middle School has an SRO, and then again, the high school. I believe my past experience pays dividends. If they being the SROs bring a concern forward, I've learned how to take that concern and explain it to the district in a way that, that makes sense, because we all know that cops talk a certain way and their perspective may not be the same as somebody in education. So figuring out how to translate it from a law enforcement perspective to a school district perspective has proved to be very valuable. We meet with them on a quarterly basis. We bring all the SROs and their command staff in, and we just sit down and we just debrief of how the previous quarter went. Is there anything you need from us? And of course, I speak to the SROs nearly on a daily basis, just checking in, taking their temperature, just seeing what they're seeing, and if there's anything that I can do in the moment. Is their radios working, their emails are working, camera login, so on and so forth.
In the Janesville School District, you, just like Beloit, you're providing police officers who are in the schools. I'm getting the impression, providing the epitome of community-based policing. You're really trying to create a relationship so that when something does arise, you have a relationship there that it's going to make the resolution an easier thing to do. Is there a different type of training that you are making sure that your officers received prior to assigning them as an SRO?
Yeah, I think it's continuous training, actually. I mean, we're looking for officers that have good, skills in talking to people, especially adolescents and younger children. But then also the National Association of School Resource Officers has like basic SRO. It's a 40-hour class. They also have I believe it's a 24-hour advanced SRO. 2 years ago, we were at the Fox Valley Technical College hosts the School Resource Officer Summit or Conference that Susan spoke at 2 years ago, or at least that's when we were there last. So I think we're constantly trying to look at what's kind of the up and coming trends and staying current so they can best do their jobs.
Well, Susan, I want to ask you, because you have the law enforcement experience, now you're on the somewhat the education side of the experience, and you find yourself in a role where you're trying to teach best practices, and there's a whole host of different areas that fall into that category of best practices. There's community-based models that, safe community schools, the CSSS program or SCSS program. You've got positive behavioral intervention and support programs. There's a whole host of behavioral approaches that, in a way, kind of take law enforcement down a different path than their traditional training. How do you overcome that? I won't say obstacle, but is there some resistance?
I would say that schools make the best decision and customize the training with law enforcement and make the best decisions at the local level. I think the best decision to make when employing a school resource officer in a school is to make sure that you have an MOU developed so that both the SRO and the school know exactly what they are doing together collaboratively for the school to keep it safe, and to make sure that the training is ongoing, as Benji said, and that you have the best training, again, so that you can do it collaboratively and make sure that the school is benefiting from that training.
Okay. And that requires law enforcement to bend a little bit in their approach to doing business. How do you take your officers and help them become a little bit more flexible and have to go with the flow, as it were?
Our expectation is, we're putting police officers in schools, and we want to have that strong partnership with school administration, with school social workers, with school mental health professionals, with all staff, all students, parents, the school board, et cetera. It goes on and on and on and on. Really, the expectation that we have for our SROs is that they are kind of serving at the pleasure of each individual, like building administrator. We try not to put them in situations where they have no power, if you will. So, for instance, hey, I need you to supervise lunch duty. Certainly, I mean, they can do that. But let's say someone throws an apple. Mm-hmm. And then the officer goes and says, hey, you can't throw an apple. The officer's not giving out school consequences. Throwing the apple, if it even would rise to the level of a citation or arrest, more than likely is it. So we're trying to put them in positions to be successful. So going outside and for lack of a better word, playing at recess, depending on if it's an elementary school, middle school, going and throwing the football around with the kids, really creating those strong bonds that hopefully will continue beyond the school setting into high school and then really into adulthood.
I'm kind of chuckling inside my, thinking back to my high school days, which was in another century ago. people throwing the apples were actually, well, my wrestling coach was really good at throwing apples across the cafeteria and nailing you in the back of the head. And we had no intervention then, so where was my school liaison when I needed one? A question from one of our listeners: to ensure school student safety on a daily basis, why is Beloit specifically more of an open door policy, where it's more important to have kids in class regardless of behaviors, disruptions, drugs, violent actions, or threats?
Open door as in like a open campus?
I'm thinking that perhaps, yeah, uh, we're, all are welcome irrespective of behaviors.
It's a good question. I'm taking this as not as an open campus as kids can leave for lunch. Obviously, that is not a policy that we have in place. It's a closed campus. But to answer the bigger question, unfortunately, it's one that I can't answer. It seems that the question is more centered around, other schools. Beloit has been in the news for a behavior problem. And I think it's not just Beloit, obviously, but that's not the conversation that is here. But all I can say is that myself, my team, those that supervise me, we come to school, come to work every single day, and we try to create an environment that is safe and secure. There are many individuals involved in kind of setting the climate of a school, if you will. And I believe in our mission. I believe that, again, we come every day to do the best that we can. I try not to swim in the negative and just know that we're not the only ones that struggle, and we have a long way to go, but just try to remain positive in that mission.
I read a study that was based upon a sampling of students over a period of time at Hoover High School in Madison. And it had to do with the policy of cell phones, where they collected cell phones at the beginning of the day, and they limited access to cell phones throughout the day. And one of the interesting things over the duration of that study, which was a couple of years, test performance improved, academic performance improved. They didn't report any increase in interaction between law enforcement and students, but the atmosphere seemed to be one that was a little bit more conducive to, I guess, having students learn. Is there a best practice, Susan, about cell phones? And if so, give us some background. Or am I opening up a can of proverbial worms?
It's a great question, and there is no good answer to that. I belong to a national school safety association, and in fact, I am on their board. It is a question that is across the United States. Should we ban phones in schools? There's no good answer. A lot of the states are saying this is a local decision. We're hearing both good and bad. Stay tuned.
It's interesting. Again, one of our listeners makes the comment that in some situations it becomes a safety issue because the cell phones are not in the hands of the student, and that creates its own set of problems. On the other hand, cell phones, by their very nature, smartphones sometimes are too smart, and that creates a set of issues. What's the policy in the Janesville School District, and how have you folks adapted to it, Sergeant?
I'm not really familiar with the school district's policy on cell phones. I want to speak on that for them. From an SRO standpoint, we haven't really had a whole lot of issues with cell phones, other than possibly not being properly secured and then stolen. But other than that, we really haven't had any issues.
In the Beloit School District, is there a policy, and how is it being being implemented?
I can't speak to the policy firsthand. I don't have it in front of me. And I don't want to misspeak. I'll be transparent that the access that kids have to phones, it can't be a good thing. I just remember, I think back to when I was in high school, and if I had a phone as a distraction, there were kids in my classes that had a distraction. I can't imagine what that learning environment would be. I do see I don't know how frequently, but kids will step out of the classroom to take a phone call. I don't know who they're talking to. Security doesn't handle, code of conduct violations and stuff like that. They merely observe, report, and let administrators know, hey, so and so's on the hallway, that kind of thing. But I can't imagine what those conversations are that are more important than the student being in the classroom, because 8+ hours a day, that's what they're there for, is to learn. But it's kids of all ages have cell phones. I mean, we have elementary, middle, and high school, and I see kids with cell phones in all 3 of those grade bands. So it hasn't gotten better. I anticipate it just getting worse as things go forward.
I have a 3.5-year-old grandson that petitioned Grandpa to buy him a cell phone because his parents wouldn't. And boy, did it put me in a tough spot. And no, he didn't get the phone. Mental health issues are paramount. From every study that I have read, they seem to be a driving force within the question of school safety. How is the state of Wisconsin Office of School Safety addressing those particular circumstances? And I know it's a district by district thing, but are there state resources available to help those districts do the right thing?
There are. And oftentimes when someone is struggling with a mental health concern, they just need someone to talk to. And if that someone is not a trusted adult in the school or at home, we have Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin. We just released our annual report, and we have increased the number of tips that were reported from last year by over 40%. We're very proud of our Speak Up, Speak Out threat reporting system. We've had over 5,000 tips reported in the past school year. Our number 1 tip is bullying. I have to tell you that when I walked into the Office of School Safety in 2018 and I was told that I was going to Portland for the first National Tip Line Conference, I thought I was going there to stand up a statewide tip line to stop school shootings. I did not know that I was going to stand up through the Office of School Safety a tip line that was going to lead the tips with bullying. But I truly understand why now that bullying is the number 1 tip, because when we look at the Secret Service study on school shooters, a lot of those school shootings were developed with grievances. And some of those grievances, not all students that have been bullied, but some of the students that were bullied began with grievances, and those were bullying grievances. And if we are able to stop or reduce the amount of violence in our schools, and perhaps stop students that start on this pathway to violence, that we can work together as a community to reduce violence not only in our schools, but as students age out of schools, K through 12, they can learn as adults to report concerning violence, concerning behavior to law enforcement, and we can reduce violence in our communities.
Bullying goes hand in hand with gangs and the gang culture. How do you address that in a very specific way, I guess? How do you address that at Beloit Memorial or at the middle schools? You've got two of them that they're challenging. What's the approach? How do you deal with that in Beloit?
Yeah, bullying is, I would say, the world's #1 problem, and nobody has yet to figure out how to end it. Again, this kind of goes back to school climate. You want to create an atmosphere kind of across the board. It's the same atmosphere you'd want in the middle school as at the high school, an atmosphere that is kind of like a family approach. Like, if Joey hears Billy being bullied by another student, the student in the middle that's overhearing it should feel, I'm part of this family. I don't want, my friend to suffer, and be bullied every single day. So use the anonymous tip reporting software system that we promote. I've got it right here, Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin. She's talked about it before, and we've gotten tips about that, about bullying situations across our district. Again, just encouraging kids to come forward about the bullying if they're hearing it, if they're the victim of it themselves. We want to come across as a district that's responsive to it. That yes, we heard this, we took this action, and yes, you can't make everybody happy. The goal is to do the best that you can. Unfortunately, bullying is one of those things that can go really undetected just because it doesn't take much to actually bully someone, right? It can be just a quick comment, and if a staff member didn't hear it, while it may be detrimental to somebody, mental health, there's just so much of it. But again, just working on school climate, try to create that positive family feel and culture that and kind of where everybody hold each other responsible.
Bullying in the Janesville School District, is there a dedicated hotline that kids can report bullying? And that brings you back to the cell phone issue thing. And how do you readily access a system to make those reports? It seems like a huge challenge.
So we're fortunate. The Janesville Area Crime Stoppers pays for P3 tips, and that is kind of our main mechanism for receiving tips, and it's extremely effective. So we'll get tips frequently about this person's suicidal. We'll get tips on crimes, of course. We'll get tips on this person's vaping in the bathroom. Lots of different tips about school, like the community issues, like our homeless problem, like lots of different things. So that is our main catalyst, I guess, for getting those tips. Something while listening, I think the other important thing is for parents or guardians to kind of check in with their kids when they get home after school and like, hey, how was school? And just kind of get that pulse. If they normally come home and they're pretty chipper and upbeat, and then suddenly like there's that, they seem like something's going on or something seems off, have that conversation. I mean, certainly we're more than willing to investigate tips of bullying and do everything possible that we can. But I think if I think there's also kids there or people that kind of suffer silently, and their caregiver or their family member might have that best pulse that something's just kind of off here.
Cyberbullying, it kind of has taken bullying to a newer, higher level. It's become a 24/7 mechanism to intimidate. How do you address it? But is there an answer out there somewhere? What's the big picture, Susan?
Bullying is our #1 tip with Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin. that is included with cyberbullying. We feel in the Office of School Safety that if schools are able to include in their bullying policies that cyberbullying component and are able to address the bullying, and there are several resources that are included with the Department of Public Instruction's toolkit. In that toolkit, it is very comprehensive. It includes additional resources for parents and resources for schools and students to assist with that bullying component. We find that that is very helpful, and to continuously provide those resources to the school. It's a community approach, and also be able to provide that outlet for students to be able to report, and also have what Ryan was talking about. What do students need? Are there barriers to them reporting? Are there resources? Are there barriers to those resources? Is there a culture and climate available for them for reporting? Are there bystanders, or what we like to call upstanders? There's a toolkit that's available to teach school communities about bystanders and helping them report if they see one of their fellow students being bullied or concerning behavior happening within their school, to help them report that. And they can report that to trusted adults in the schools. There's never enough locations for students and staff to be able to report concerning behavior. If it's not SUSO, if it's not a trusted adult, there's other platforms to report.
The definition of bullying is changed through the years. I mean, again, from one of our listeners, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And now words are vicious, and they can hurt on a continual basis. And it's not a matter of kids becoming soft. It's a matter of, if you hear you are stupid or ugly or malformed often enough, you either start believing it or you get depressed thinking that, yeah, my peers think that I'm all of those things. It creates a vicious circle in the environment that it almost puts your liaison officers and your teachers and your administrators in a position where they've got to be a detective, and they've got to be a counselor, and they've got to be a corner psychiatrist, psychologist, and they've got to be a correctional officer, and they've got to be a disciplinarian. And all the while, I signed up just to teach history classes. It's a challenging environment. And it's a different environment today than what it was back in the old days, in that previous century, where if my buddy Ronnie would come up and want to smack me, and I finally said, you can do that, but I'm going to break your neck, and that was the end of the bullying circumstance. Now it's a continuous cycle. It almost seems like the environment is setting up a circumstance where the kids are at a real disadvantage if they want to actually learn.
Well, and we're really kind of, we had a call earlier in the week where there was and without getting too much into detail, there was a series of students that were, continuously sending a message, just trying to more or less blow up this other person's phone, and no harmful words, but more or less still bullying. I mean, it was. We also have a lot of issues that come out of weekends, where there's some beef, if you will, via social media, some Snapchat, whatever, and then that carries over, and then suddenly we have issues on Monday. So, yeah, the cell phone and just the technology is just a new, it'll be interesting to see how some of these kids that receive phones at like 10, 11, 12 years old, how they are in the workplace at 30, 40 years old.
I have those conversations already with people, and they suggest that the most telling thing is when you have a group of people in a room and you have two people sitting such as you, and you're communicating via text to each other as opposed to actually orally speaking to each other.
Yes.
And that's a real reality these days. And it's a sad reality. The social media side of the coin creates another policy conundrum that you have to deal with. The outcomes, we're inundated with TikTok and texting and I don't know, all of the various platforms that are out there. It seems like with each passing day there's a new alphabet soup of electronic means of either doing good or doing evil, and more often than not we find ourselves facing the evil. How do you keep up? How do you keep up, Susan?
That's a great question. We have been talking about that, and in our office with our Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin threat reporting system, an important aspect of that is our staff is trained in digital threat assessment. And we offer to our schools, we can provide digital threat assessment when we have a username. So if a tip comes in and it's for bullying or it's for something that a username from social media is provided, and it is open source intelligence, which means that the social media is not closed or private, we have the ability to look at that social media and we can provide information to the school concerning that. It's very, very important when you do behavioral threat assessment and management that you investigate everything when it comes to a threat. And now with social media playing such a large role in our lives, we need to look at the baseline of someone's social media to see what is on their social media. We have to be very careful in Wisconsin, especially this time of the year, because we have a lot of people that are hunting. So it doesn't mean that just because you have access to weapons that you are a threat. It just means that your baseline means that there's a tradition in your family that you go deer hunting and you have access to weapons. What is important is that your baseline includes that tradition. If you're using weapons in a maybe unsafe way, that information can be shared. There are other things that can be shared when we do a digital threat assessment with perhaps unsafe use of alcohol or drugs. If there's questionable activity with suicide or other self-harm. So that's one way the Office of School Safety is able to address the social media and a baseline with digital threat assessment that we can provide to schools in those parameters of open source intelligence.
And that raises that very sensitive question of where is the line between freedom of speech and invasion of privacy? And how is that measured, and who's doing the measuring?
Yes, and also parents teach your children to have their social media private. Because this is all open source information, and you should have your social media private.
By having your social media private, that kind of, on the one hand, defeats the purpose of being able to monitor digitally trends in behaviors.
Yes.
And you've got that fine line again. that's got to be a day-by-day sort of question mark that you approach that line cautiously, don't you?
Yes, but that's what Benji brought up before,
Mm-hmm.
where your parents, they should be monitoring your social media, right? It shouldn't be private to your parents. It should be private to us. You should be monitoring your children. Anyone under 18, you should be monitoring your kids' social media.
I think the biggest shock in my life came when I took my first child off to college and I discovered that because they were 18, I had no access to their collegiate records whatsoever. And I'm thinking,
Yes.
whoa, this. Yeah, you raise an interesting point, though. From a community perspective, how do you enforce some level of parental involvement in students and student life? How, it kind of goes back to that conundrum that you can't legislate morality necessarily. How can you legislate parents taking an active role in their children's lives?
One conversation at a time.
Okay.
If I don't often have conversations with parents, but if they're calling me to look at video or express a concern or whatever it may be, I take as many opportunities as I can. Like, yep, this is I'm sad to hear that your son or daughter is experiencing this situation. It's not just this particular school grade. We've been battling bullying forever, but here are some things you can do to help us. In your mom's groups, your dad's group, talk about keeping an eye on social media accounts and letting be aware of the tip reporting system. You don't have to give your identity. You can do an app, website, phone call, whatever it may be, but just try to spread awareness that way, because those individuals we're talking to, they're going through a tough time through their kid. So they're more open to hearing what you're saying as opposed to just putting out blanket communication, right? I mean, we're inundated with emails and text messages all day, every day, not just from school districts, but from everywhere. And, you pick and choose what you read, but so if it's not really relevant to your day-to-day, you're probably not going to take much stock in it. But if it's somebody coming from the school saying, hey, you can really help us. Like, if we can, get this to you and you spread it to somebody else about, what, I haven't checked my daughter's, Snapchat in a while or Instagram, and they go in there and their daughter is just being awful to somebody else. Well, you know what, maybe that just ended that bullying, that situation. Or on the other side, maybe somebody realizes that their son or daughter is being bullied and now they can deal with that, but had they not checked social media, they would have never known.
It kind of goes back to one of those programs out there on a national basis that has had some amount of success, and that's Parental Partners in Prevention. And it's a program that actively gets parents involved in their kids' lives as they progress through the school system at all levels. And it seems like it has worked in some jurisdictions, and it hasn't taken off here locally, but it's like so many other things. We try and decentralize our programming, and it becomes a district by district basis to pick and choose. Do you ever feel overwhelmed with the fact that you have a limited number of school officers, school resource officers, you have a limited number of school resource officers, and you've got a whole bunch of young people and teachers and administrative staff that you need to be keeping a finger on the pulse at some big schools? That's an awesome responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's a very honorable responsibility as well. I mean, the opportunity to and when I go visit our SROs, I'm always amazed at, and there's no way to measure this, but like you hear stories about, I just needed one person to care about me, or one person that, it's like, I always think to myself, are our SROs, changing, and this is gonna sound a little grandiose, but like, are they having a good positive impact on somebody that maybe isn't getting that reward type system at home? And it's like, every day, officer blah, blah, blah says, good morning, and how's your day? And I never hear that. And, you hear that all the time about like somebody making a difference, educators. So it's just, I think it's a very rewarding opportunity to try to make a difference, and of course prepare and be prepared for the day that we hope and pray never occurs, but also like not be so rigid that we can't form those relationships, and really try to make that a positive experience for the students, the staff, and and that the parents at home feel comfortable that their kids are in good hands at school.
The hard reality is, though, that at Craig High School, you've got one SRO that's dealing with 1,400 students and a faculty of 125 and an administrative staff of another 40 or so. And at Beloit, you've got 900 at Beloit Memorial and same sort of numbers. It's got to be overwhelming. How do you keep morale among your SROs at a reasonable level of hey, I want to continue going to work every day, right?
I will say that I spend when I'm out in the buildings, I spend most of my time at the high school for that exact reason, morale, right? It's, it's a tough world to begin with. And when you've got, 1,000 more students in one place contained in 4 walls, and it's just kind of a unrelenting call volume, whatever it may be. The calls are sporadic, and nobody gets time to stop and eat lunch or take a drink or use the restroom. Yep, they're feeling down. I again go back, I pull from my training of, if I had a rough day on the street and something, what made me feel better was just sitting down and kind of debriefing with my team, or just, make a joke that gets everybody laughing and just go, you know what, we're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to do this all over again because the people that are here need us. That's why we're here. And again, just checking in with them. Just I've gotten calls where I wasn't in the building and one of my staff called, like, can you just come down here? Like, they just want somebody down there just to talk with them, be with them. And again, just show that, we're all on the same team and I'm here if you need something. So
We've got just a couple of minutes left, and in that couple of minutes, I want to leave it up to each of you individually. If you, in your final minute available or so, what would be your plea to involve the community in perhaps being a part of a solution? What would be the message that you would want the community to hear from you and from your perspective, and the perspective of who you represent, if knowing that the community needs to be part of the solution and not part of the problem?
I would say we have 105 police officers in this city, with anywhere from 8 to 15 working at any given time. We can't be everywhere at once. We can't be at every classroom, every school, every hallway, and every locker area. We are very reliant on our community to report things to us. And of course, we're talking about school issues today, but that's in every facet, like whether it's somebody suspicious in their neighborhood, or a car that's been parked across the street for 3 months that, like, hey, why aren't the police doing anything about this? We probably don't even know it's parked there. So I think we're very reliant on report, and I hear from time to time, oh, I didn't want to waste your guys' time. You're never wasting our time. We'd rather check it out and determine that, yep, nope, it's all good, it was whatever it might be, than be a situation where people felt like, oh, they probably already know that, or they I don't want to bother them. They have more important things to do. Because that's what we're there for. We're there to serve the community.
Ryan, same question.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've been talking about all along. The first thing I would say is just please don't become complacent. Complacency often can lead to tragedies. Oh, this can never happen here, right? Or that, that text that I saw come through on my kid's phone. No, I'm not going to take any stock in that and not report it. Report that stuff. Don't become complacent and then about like the social media thing. Building and safety and security is kind of everyone's role. I talked to our staff in the district. It doesn't hurt just to go push on a door and make sure it's locked. Same thing with parents. Like, we need eyes and ears everywhere. The more eyes and ears we have out there in the community, the safer we can be. Just to your point about there's never enough cameras, at a particular building. There's never enough eyes out in the community, for us. And I feel like we've given everyone the ability to report things, whether they want to be named or not. And so there really isn't a good excuse not to share the stuff that you're seeing out in the community. We know this stuff goes on. We just need to hear about it so we can act on it.
Susan Whitstone, you've got literally thousands of students that are in your purview across the state of Wisconsin. What's the message to the community that you want them to hear and you want their parents to hear, and how do we get those parents involved?
Well, we have Speak Out Wisconsin. It's a statewide tip line. It's confidential, so if you're in fear of retaliation and you don't feel comfortable telling a trusted adult, you can use the tip line. It's for the entire state of Wisconsin. It's for the entire school community. And I say the same thing that our panel is saying here today. If you see something concerning, report it. You may be saving a life.
Thank you very much. Ryan Turner, Beloit School District Safety Coordinator, thank you so much for being here. Sergeant Benji Thompson, Janesville Police Department, always a pleasure. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
And Susan Whitstone, Deputy Director, Department of Justice, Wisconsin's Office of School Safety. Really a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you. That's going to wrap our session. We always continue our conversation at Havana Coffee on Wednesdays at 2. So slip by, join us, and we'll continue that conversation about school safety and bullying and whatever else is on your mind for the entire crew. Thank you very much, and good evening.